Hello, Eleanor Beaton here, and welcome back to our third installment of our series on women and capital called Capital is a Verb. You know, women are taught how to earn money, but very few of us are taught how to deploy capital. And this 6-episode series really focuses on one of the most under-focused topics in women's entrepreneurship today, which is, of course, capital deployment. If you want to build real economic power, long-lasting wealth and impact, capital deployment and understanding capital isn't aspirational, it isn't optional, it is absolutely foundational and critical to the growth of your wealth, impact, and business. So let's dive in. If you haven't listened to our first 2 episodes in the series, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to them. And this is episode 3 of the Capital is a Verb series, and it is called Capital is a Verb. So the thing is, most operators think about capital as a noun. They think about cash. Maybe you think about reserves. Maybe you think about savings. Maybe you think about funding. Maybe you think about money. Lots of people think about capital as a noun, but sophisticated operators think about capital as a verb. Capital is something you do. Okay, you may have encountered this. So you've got 2 different entrepreneurs or operators, and they make roughly the same amount of money, but they operate and they are living 2 very different pictures. One person has no freedom. They work all the time. The other operator has a lot of freedom. They are much more relaxed. They don't need to work as much. Maybe one of those operators never seems to have available cash to do things, whereas the other operator actually has a ton of available cash. I'm curious if you've run into this situation or you felt yourself in one of those 2 seats before. The thing that separates these 2 founders who are making the same amount of revenue isn't revenue, it's capital behavior. That is the core differentiator, how they behave with capital, i.e., it's not revenue as in something that they have, it's capital as in a verb, something that they do with that capital. So the core idea here is that capital is a verb, and every founder is constantly doing one of 3 things. Whether you're doing this intentionally or unwittingly, you are doing one of these 3 things. So the first thing that you're doing is manufacturing capital. And what this means is you are turning revenue into surplus. And that is the place where many entrepreneurs actually stop. All they think about is, how do I turn revenue into a surplus? If that's you, you're basically doing 1/3 of the wealth building equation, by the way. And so many women entrepreneurs stop there and again, wonder why they feel so broke, wonder why they're not wealthier, wonder why they don't have optionality, because most business education available to women entrepreneurs just has us focusing on that first piece, which is how do you turn revenue into surplus? But that is the act of manufacturing capital. And in the Jewel capital framework, that is the first area that we look at, is manufacturing capital. All right. The second verb, the second part of capital is a verb, is protecting capital. So first you manufacture it, then you have to protect your capital. So what does this mean? This means creating reserves and optionality. And this has a lot to do with the buckets where you are putting your excess capital. And it looks at things like your taxes. It looks at things like reserves. It's where you start to pay yourself. So protecting capital is once you've manufactured it, i.e. you've turned revenue into surplus, then you have to protect that surplus first. That's the most important thing. You've got to protect it first. And that's what we talk about as capital preservation or protecting capital. So that is the second third of the Jewel capital framework. So we move from first manufacturing capital, then we move into protecting capital, which brings us to our third activity, which is deploying capital. And that is turning today's dollars into future value. So the founders who are building not just revenue growth, but true enterprise value. And if you don't know what enterprise value is, we'll link in the show notes to an episode where I walk you through what that is and why it's so critical that you focus not only on generating revenue, but on building enterprise value. But the founders who create true enterprise value, they get progressively better at all three parts of what we call the Jewel capital framework. First, they get better at manufacturing capital. Then they focus on getting better at protecting capital. Then they get better at deploying capital. You want to build your skill and your capability to do all three. This is the key to true, long-lasting wealth creation, optionality, and enterprise value. So over the course of the next 3 episodes, I'm going to take a deeper dive into what we call the Jewel Capital Framework, which is basically going to explore why more revenue isn't making you wealthier, the most important number in your business, and why some investments change everything. And very specifically, we're going to be going into next week, we're going to be talking about manufacturing capital and how you do that. Then the episode after that, we're going to be talking about protecting capital and how you do that. And then we're going to talk about deploying capital and how you do that. It is a complete capital framework. And what's important for you to know is that this is outlining the broad strokes of a capital framework. But inside that, you are going to need to, there are nuances, right? No two women entrepreneurs are the same. How your goals are not going to be the same. How you define success is not necessarily going to be the same. Your industries are not necessarily going to be the same. So inside this 3-part capital framework, manufacture, protect, and deploy, there are nuances that are going to be very unique to your own business. And I think that's where it's really critical that you take these buckets as the larger framework and guideline. And inside that, you are going to create the nuances that make sense for your business. Every woman needs her own custom capital framework to be real. So come back next week to take a deep dive into how to manufacture capital using something called the margin stack. I can't wait to dive into that. People love when I talk about the margin stack. So definitely come back to listen to that episode. And if you haven't completed the capital strength assessment, I encourage you to do so. Most women founders in our ecosystem don't have a capital problem per se. They actually have a capital framework problem. So because of all of the reasons that I've been talking about, which is very often we're only sort of educated on one of the financial scoreboards. So we're running our business from half a scoreboard. And today, as we talk about the 3-part capital framework system, most women operators are actually only focused on the very first piece of it, which is manufacturing capital. And they never build that true capital framework, that true wealth building approach, because they're missing 2/3 of their capital framework. So the capital strength assessment is going to help you come to a stronger understanding of where you are right now. You can take that assessment at safimedia.co/capital. That's safimedia.co/capital. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a woman operator you think would benefit, and I will see you back here next week. Thank you so much for tuning into the episode. If you found value in what I shared, please go ahead and like this video, give it a thumbs up, and leave me a review or leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.